The subject which I have kind of picked up is a vast subject, and you will excuse me if I fail to do real justice to it. We are talking about the biography of Srivendu and the mother as presented in Savitri. It is impossible to cover a theme of that magnitude in just 15 minutes. All that I can do is to give some suggestions, some hints, some ideas, some indications. What could be seen or read in Savitri as far as we can read it. Much of it is entirely beyond our reach. That does not mean that Savitri was written for nothing. It is also a means for us to grow into it, live in it, expand into it, achieve our realizations through it. That is the theme of Savitri. Srivendu himself had worked on it for several years, most intensively during the last 10-15 years, roughly from 1938 to 1950. He had completed drafting part 1 of Savitri by 1942. From that point onward, he had to take help, and as we know, the help was provided to him by Nirodbaran, help in writing, in doing his secretarial work in the room, in that sense. By 1942, he had completed in his own hand part 1 of Savitri. From 42 onward, he started turning his attention or attending to the other 2 parts. In fact, he was writing some of the parts till as late as 1949. And at the same time, he was constantly revising these drafts. Why I am giving you this background is because Savitri includes all his yogic biographical aspects. If we have to see Srivendu, we have to see Srivendu's life as a yogi's life. And that yogi's life is present in Savitri. We might divide Savitri in 2 major halves. As you know, there are about 49 cantos of Savitri. First 24 cantos form part 1, and the other 25 part 2 and part 3. In terms of the number of lines, we have roughly 24,000 lines. To be exact, 23,837 lines in Savitri. Of these 24,000 lines, we can say that 12,000 belong to the biography of Srivendu himself, and the other 12,000 to the biography of the mother. In other words, Savitri is at once a double biography. of mother and Sri Aurobindo. It is also, we might say, an autobiography of both of them. Nobody else can write his biography except he himself. And that is what we have in Savitri. But if you are looking for dates, events, interactions and all that, even those to some extent you can find in Savitri if you are careful enough to see the way in which they have been put. They have not been put in the analytical, Cartesian, linear manner, one after the other, in the sequential manner. But all those things are definitely present there. His experiences, prior to his coming to Pondicherry, during the period 105, 110, basically during the period 108, 110, are described in the very first few pages of Savitri. And if we say that Savitri does not give the biographical account, I will say it is a misunderstanding of the epic. And that should be dismissed from our minds. In fact, I might read some passages also if we get time, but I don't know whether we can. The very first description is Ashwapati comes. Now, well, before I come to Ashwapati, let me tell you what these two parts really represent in Savitri. The first part is the biography of the Supreme Being. The second part is the biography of the Divine Shakti, of presence and power, of will and action, of sankalpa, determination to get things done, and kriya, karya. Produce those things, put them into action. These are the two important aspects. The other name for this will be, if you want to say, Bhagavan and Bhagavati. If you want to say Ashwapati and Savitri, if I want to say, I will say Sri Aurobindo and the mother. These are the two aspects which are prominently present in Savitri, and we have to understand them in that manner. Why presence and power? Why the Supreme Being and the Divine Shakti? What is their role in this creation? For what purpose? All this here around. The problem is the problem of divine manifestation upon earth, upon the mortal world, Mrityu Loka. It is this Mrityu Loka which must open itself to the possibilities of divine manifestation here. And in order to do that, the Supreme Himself comes down here. He does yoga tapasya. He establishes the things necessary for that to happen. Not only does He do yoga tapasya here, He also creates a support, adhara, bhumi, ground for the Divine Shakti to come and operate here. She needs a support. She cannot work from there. She needs a base here, ground here. And that support, that ground is provided by the yoga tapasya of the divine being. He comes for that purpose. He does it. Then she comes and she does her work. Her work is, to start with, the work of eliminating, of removing, of dismissing all that opposes the divine manifestation. Clear the ground. The ground is cleared first by removing death. Who is standing across the path of the divine event? If that is removed, then the new manifestation can take place. Now, in addition to that, what the divine being, what Ashwapati does is, in fact, he does two things. First thing is, he goes through all the worlds of manifestation here. Not as a traveler, not as a sojourner, not that it is a description of a travelogue. He is going through all the worlds, to all the places in this kingdom, is to create an adhara for her, so that she works here. On the basis of that adhara, then she can work here. The second thing which he does is, he creates a new world in the transcendent. New creation is first established up there, and her work lies in bringing down that creation here upon earth. That is the biographical aspect of it. When was all that done? All that was done in the death's tremendous hour. That is the boon which was given to Ashwapati by the Divine Mother in the death's tremendous hour. Which was that death's tremendous hour? 1:26 a.m., 5th December 1950. It is in that tremendous hour that the seed of the new creation was cast, and things started happening with that. Thank you very much.
In fact, Sri Aurobindo is a gold mine, as many of us who read him will know. You can put your hand in at any point and take out whatever you want, and he will suit the occasion at any sort of quotation or any citation or any reference, because his work is so prodigious and so vast that there is so much to say. 15 minutes is not enough, one lifetime is not enough, and one always wonders how a single person could have written so much prodigious work that he has turned in. It's remarkable. And yet he had found time to live also. That's the strangest thing about him. But when one really approaches him, one really finds that so little can be said about him too. So this paradox remains. How to approach a person, a master yogi, who has himself written, if you were to take his words as authority, that my life has never been on the outside for people to see. It has always been internal. So it's not easy to interpret him or make a kind of hermeneutic approach to his works. And I'm not trying to do that here. I'm not going to take up any of his works and try to interpret and make a text of it. What I'm trying to do for the next 15 minutes would be to give a kind of perception, a kind of way of seeing of Sri Aurobindo, the poet and the man, the thinker and the yogi, which could help us in clarifying things for ourselves a great deal. Because when you think about the global and spiritual culture and Sri Aurobindo's contributions towards such a global and spiritual culture, we have a lot of problematics in that. Primarily because he is a person who has been in time and out of time, because he has a historical existence, 1872 to 1950. He spent 50 years of his life, 40 years of his life here in Pondicherry as a yogi. He never did anything, move out of this place, despite compulsion and despite invitations. Even from Mahatma Gandhi, he never left Pondicherry. So there are so many problems when we approach a person who has given rise to a global and spiritual mainstream culture. Because we have seen that, any sociologist or historian or anthropologist, history of ideas, any student would easily see that there has been a mainstream culture in history, and there have also been subcultures, innumerable subcultures, which have always had to resist this major culture. Subcultures which have never come to the forefront, like cultures of Adivasis, cultures of tribals, cultures of the subaltern people, cultures of the non-herd, cultures of women, culture of nature, and so many ways in which we can look at these subcultures too. At the same time, there has been a parallel third culture also, which I am trying to develop here, which has been a kind of hieratic culture, which belongs to the spiritual tradition, which belongs to the Gnostics, and which belongs to the religious founders of religion, and people who have been thinking differently. So there has been this three-part way in which, if you go back to Socrates, you could start with know thyself, or if you go to the Upanishads, you have to aham brahmasmi, or know thyself, and that kind of, inward culture, which has always been there. Sri Aurobindo has been a thinker who I believe belongs to this third tradition, the third spiritual culture, where thinking in terms of rationality and speculation, as we are born to believe, has gone along with a spiritual kind of awareness. It's not easy for many of us to recognize. Descartes has been cited by Professor Deshpande. Descartes, who tried to relate rationality to the real, and Descartes, who gave rise to a kind of enlightenment culture, which led to the scientific and the dominant culture of the present, where we equate progress with westernization, urbanization, modernizing, and liberal Americanization, and things like that. So Descartes has given rise to this rationality. But Sri Aurobindo, who belongs to the tradition of the Cartesian rationality, because he was brought up in the West, he had the inheritance of Nietzsche, Heidegger, Spinoza, the entire Western tradition, and the rationalizing brain. But he also comes to a point where he tries to realize himself in a kind of silencing. Because you will find that I have in fact many quotations here, many citations, but I wouldn't be going into that. He evokes these ideas of silence and austerity and withdrawal and meditation and living as a recluse. So there is apparent contradiction at the outside. You have this knowledge from within which goes without action in the mainstream world, and you also have a kind of thirst for ratiocinization or rationalizing what one has speculated. Because you can see that Sri Aurobindo has written so much about how to know oneself. And he has also written about bhakti. He has also written about the withdrawal of recluse, being a silent. At one point he has even written, I am a jnana, I am a bhakta, I am a madman. I would like to touch Krishna and touch the blue, and then the experience of that. So a kind of ecstasy which comes from the recognition of the kind of the borderline between silence and articulation. So that is something which Sri Aurobindo gives rise to, which leads him to make the statement that he speaks about poetry as a mode of self-revelation and a self-recovery. Because probably people like Sri Aurobindo can only articulate in terms of a poetic mode. Even Heraclitus before him could only do that. Pascal could only do that in terms of poetry. Sri Aurobindo belongs to that line where he recognizes that poetry is the mode of utterance which actually suits this kind of double tongue, articulation and silence at the same time. Probably that is what makes him go into this point. One of the major thinkers of the Western canon, T.S. Eliot, who was a modernist for that matter, T.S. Eliot makes a very interesting statement which will also help us understand Sri Aurobindo a little. He says that the critical mind that operates within poetry is always far superior to the critical mind that operates on poetry from without. So here what I want you to recognize is the kind of double way in which he demarcates the critical mind operating within poetry and the critical mind operating without or outside poetry. Sri Aurobindo has both, because he has been a poet continuously. Ever since he was aware of the problems of language, he has been grappling with language, writing poetry, thinking about poetry, contributing towards a poetics, and at the same time translating. Because I don't think anyone of the scale of Sri Aurobindo, no, none else but Sri Aurobindo, could have done the kind of translations which he has done. From Gujarati, from Marathi, from his own native tongue, Bengali, from Tamil, Andal, he has translated, and from Sanskrit, his notes on Mahabharata and writings on Vyasa and Valmiki are amazing, and even Kalidasa. The range of his translations are really amazing. So what it goes to prove is the kind of grappling with language and grappling with poetry. He has been a poet through and through. Not only writing poetry, but also thinking about poetry, articulating a poetics, for instance, future poetry. The text itself is something which was produced within a space of 2 to 3 years, but the man has done amazing work, bringing a kind of whole tradition of the Western poetics right from Aristotle, Plato, and even from Socrates for that matter, and coming down to T.S. Eliot and W.B. Yeats and Meredith and A.E. and so many others, and also linking it to the kind of lawgivers like Bharata, Abhinavagupta and Anandavardhana. So you can see the kind of mixing in of both the Western and the Eastern traditions in Sri Aurobindo's contributions as a poet and as a thinker at the same time. And this is where I really want us to spend a few minutes with Sri Aurobindo. A kind of citation. He says, one has to have an inner vision and an outer critical insight, because either the absence of the insight or the outer critical vision could lead but to either adulation or desecration. He makes it very clear, because if you fall in love with a man and try to revere him and try to deify him, what happens is you are moving away from the contributions of the intellectual. But at the same time, if you desacralize him and consider him as something very redundant, who speaks very, very hieratic kind of language, who is somebody in the kind of subcultures of spirituality within quotes, you are actually moving away from the truth again. So we have to have a via media between desecration and deification in order to understand that. Every age has to rediscover its poetry and poetics, because as a poet and as a critic, Sri Aurobindo considers himself only as a kind of facilitator. Because let me go back to T.S. Eliot for a few minutes too, because Eliot, in fact, strangely enough, was a person who occurred at a time when the Western world was trying to rediscover metaphysicals. Because metaphysicals were poets who lived along the time of Shakespeare, people like John Donne or Herbert, Vaughan, Marvell, and many others. But Eliot actually rediscovered the metaphysicals, because Eliot recognized that the metaphysicals were people who could couple intellectuality and sensation, that is, thinking and feeling at the same time. Eliot at one point had written, "A thought to Donne was an experience." A thought to Donne, John Donne, was an experience. Now look at the way in which thought and experience has been brought together. Thought and experience cannot easily be brought together, because when you start thinking, you are rationalizing and you are moving away. But when you try to experience, you are sensationalizing and you are not thinking. But a thought to Donne was an experience. So bringing together, or rather the unification of sensibility, this is what he speaks about in his famous essay on, unification of sensibility. He said that perhaps, people like Milton had been kind of desecrating the sensibility and they have been moving away from that. Similarly, Sri Aurobindo has this kind of unifying way in which rationality and experience comes together, and that is possible only in his poetry. I am not going into a reading of his poems. I have got many here. In fact, a rereading of Savitri itself would yield us enough material to sustain my argument, to show how he has been able to rationalize and bring together this unification of sensibility, not the dissociation of this, because this is where he actually talks about the mystical wisdom and creative intuition. These are only technical terms for us. Many of us do not really realize what is creative intuition, because when we go into Sri Aurobindo's future poetry, we recognize the way in which he has sorted out, the levels of mental. We talk about mental creation, over mental creation, or even higher mind or illumined mind, intuition, super mind. And he discriminates between these things. The innumerable letters with Professor K.D. Sethna has brought together and edited called overmental poetry, overhead poetry. In fact, it's a very funny term, overhead poetry. Maybe it is overmental poetry. Because what actually happens here is he shows the range of the origin or the source of each line, each verse. For instance, even the words from the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Aurobindo quotes them, Anityam asugam lokam imam prapya bhajasvama. It's a magnificent concept according to Sri Aurobindo. He cites this line as a kind of touchstone and he says, look at this line. This line is really amazing. Now we have to take his word for it. Because here is a man who has a critical intuition and a creative mind at the same time. Because what is so special about Anityam, Asugam, Logam, Imam Prapya, Bhajasvama? Go deep into it, meditate, use it as a kind of touchstone which will help us understand Homer and put us beside us. Look at Chaucer. And he gives a kind of interpretation of the entire Western poetry right up to the present. So he shows that, there is a lineage, a line which actually connects the past with the present, which we have to dig up, that third phase, which I have been talking about, the spiritual culture, which we need to recover in order to understand a person who says that one has to recognize the quality of yoga as bhakti. This is the point where I am trying to convert. I'm just concluding, because it was Sri Aurobindo who pointed out that the highest yoga is bhakti yoga. Because when he interpreted the Bhagavad Gita, of course, almost everybody who are contemporary with Sri Aurobindo in the nationalist phase have at one point or other gone and interpreted the Bhagavad Gita, the word of God. And Sri Aurobindo, strangely enough, does not make it highlight the Karma Yoga part as Mahatma Gandhi has done, or the Jnana Yoga part as Vivekananda has done, but he talks about the Bhakti Yoga part. How could it be possible for so powerful and intellectual to surrender himself, to completely, let himself go? That is something which will bring together the rational and the kind of intuitive part, which I am trying to argue. And this is the proposal which I am putting forward here. So then, 3 points. I'll just wind up with 1 minute, as you have said. 3 things, just the first point which I would like to stress is when we approach Sri Aurobindo Poetics, which I am sure I'll have some more time when we have our discussions to elaborate. There is a paradox of stillness and sound, which is there in Sri Aurobindo, which I have tried to make out here, which we can highlight as the inexpressible and the articulate, Because Sri Aurobindo at many points has said that one has to tease the inarticulate to articulate, That's what he does in his yogic phases, as Professor Deshpande has already said, not only the whole inner journey of Ashupati, but the inner journey of Savitri, which is actually more dense here. It's a kind of inward journey where you can see this articulation or teasing the inexpressible to express itself. The second one is, of course, politics and spirituality, but I am not going in depth into that, because there is a unity of what we understand as politics and spirituality in Sri Aurobindo. And the third point is the range of his works, because you can see the kind of amazing level of the integrative vision that Sri Aurobindo has tried to do. He has not left out even history. The human cycle is an amazing work of sociology, and if you go into interpretative texts, he has written and translated the first 10 mandalas of the Rig Veda, the hymns to Agni. So, and the Synthesis of Yoga, which still remains a unique work. So like that, he has been able to talk about poetry and poetics, which are integral to the Aurobindian system. So I think I will conclude with the statement that the touch of the poet is seen continuously at any point in Sri Aurobindo, and he continued to be a poet till the end of his life. Thank you very much.
Aurobindo's original writings in Sanskrit. Sanskrit was a language which was very much near and dear to Mother and Sri Aurobindo, and it is the language in which India's soul is expressed to the fullest. And anyone who wants to go deep into the heart of India, the knowledge of this language is must. So Sri Aurobindo not only spoke about Sanskrit language, and if you look at his contribution towards the Vedas, Upanishads, and Kalidas, Bhartrihari, both the epic, classical and the Vedic languages. So his contribution is immense, and here we have many writings from him originally in Sanskrit. So if you look at the entire Sanskrit Vangmaya, you can find different ways of expression like poetic devices, Drishya Kavya, Shravya Kavya, and in Drishya Kavya you have Rupaka, all the dramas and plays. In Shravya Kavya you have Padya, poetry. There are also various other ways of expressing, Gadya, the prose. And then the uniqueness of Sanskrit language is the sutra form of writing. I don't think this sutra way of writing exists in any other language. So then you have Bhashya and Vyakhyana Granthas, which have got a unique style. So Sri Aurobindo used almost all these poetic devices to express various things or his own experiences or his own vision using these poetic devices and using Sanskrit as the medium. So we have text like Bhavane Bharati, poetry from Sri Aurobindo, which is entirely an invocation of Mother India. Then we have Sri Aurobindo in which he has expressed his yogic experience or yogic vision in a very Upanishadic manner. The language and the style, everything is Upanishadic. Then we have Sapta Chatushtaya, a set of sentences which he received in Alipur jail, and these were his guidelines for his sadhana. Then we have Tantrika Siddhi Prakaranam, which is not yet published in manuscript form. And we have Kaivalya Upanishad Mantra Vakhya. So here he has interpreted in Sanskrit the first mantra of Kaivalya Upanishad, which also is not yet published. So I'll just give you a brief note on each text. Bhavane Bharati, it was composed sometime between 1904 and 1908, and it's entirely, as I told you, that it's an invocation of Mother India, only 99 verses. So far, a lot of people who are familiar with this text, they know that all these 99 verses are composed in a meter called Upajati. But I have done extensive research on the meters, the metrical patterns, and there I was going deep into the various patterns of Upajati. Upajati is a mixed meter of Indra Vajra and Upendra Vajra, where you find in each line 11 syllables, so altogether 44 syllables. And Upajati is a mixture. So there is only one Narayani Tika which gives various this combination of Indra Vajra and Upendra Vajra, how many varieties of Upajati that we can get. So Narayani Tika mentions 14 different types of Upajati meters we get in the Chanda Shastras and used by various poets. So I was a bit fascinated by this, and I did a little scanning of all the verses of Bhavane Bharati to see whether Sri Aurobindo has used all these 14 varieties of Upajati, and yes. So Sri Aurobindo has used all these 14 varieties of Upajati only in Bhavane Bharati, and all the 99 verses are not in Upajati as it is understood by many. So 81 verses are in Upajati, pure, all these 14 varieties of Upajati meter, and 17 verses are in purely Indra Vajra, and 1 verse in Upendra Vajra Chanda. And this text was confiscated by Calcutta police, and in 1985 Sri Aurobindo Ashram recovered it and published it. Now it is available in published form. So then we have Sri Aurobindo Upanishad, a very small text. It contains only, say, 27 lines, and it was written between 1910 to 1914, and his own spiritual experience, where he says that this Brahman is Satya and the Jagat is also Satya. Brahma Satya, Jagat Satya. So this is the essence of this Upanishad. Those who have time can purchase this book and go through it. It's a beautiful experience to read Sri Aurobindo in original Sanskrit. Now, Sapta Chatushtaya is a set of sentences which he received in Alipur jail, and afterwards, in 20th November 1913, he wrote it. This is what is mentioned in the record of yoga. So it's a part of the record of yoga, the new volumes which have come and are not yet published separately. So here, he speaks of 7 quatrains explained here as Shanti Chatushtaya, Shakti Chatushtaya, Vijnana Chatushtaya, Sharira Chatushtaya, Karma or Leela Chatushtaya, Brahma Chatushtaya, and Yoga or Sansiddhi Chatushtaya. So this is one of, and this is again the uniqueness is that this text is written in sutra style. So sutra, Bhavani Bharati is poetry, and Sri Aurobindo is prose, and sutra is a very unique style where you have the definition of sutra as it is given by the sutrakaras is alpaksharam. It contains very minimum syllables, and asandigdham, it is free from all doubt. Alpaksharam, asandigdham, saravat. So it is the essential, it brings out the essence of the entire idea which is expressed. Vishwatomukham, it has a wider applicability. Astogham, free from all errors. And anavadyam, it contains a truth which is irrefutable by others. So this is the sutra form. Saptachatushtaya of Sri Aurobindo is in sutra form. And again, another text which is not yet published is Tantrika Siddhi Prakaranam. He actually wanted to bring out or write a full text on Tantra. So of which Tantrika Siddhi Prakaranam is just one chapter and only 38 lines are available. It is not yet published in manuscript form. So current is not there. I could have shown you the scanned version of the manuscript from archives. So this text in 2008 January issue of Mother India, so the text was published with an English translation done by me. And so this is again another work which gives a completely different, brings out the completely different dimension of the tantric knowledge. And then after that you have this Kaivalya Upanishad where you can see a Vyakhyana or Bhashya style. So he has taken only the first mantra of Kaivalya Upanishad. He has done the Anvaya, following the tradition of Vyakhyana style or Bhashya style. Then the Pratipada Padartha, the word by word meaning. And then the usual Gudhartha he brings out in 5 pages. In his own handwriting, the manuscript is available. Again, I also have the scanned version here. So this is how Sri Aurobindo, you can see how Sri Aurobindo has used all these poetic devices, the Padya, Gadya, Sutra and Bhashya style to bring out his own yogic or spiritual experiences or vision or poetry using Sanskrit as a language. So that's all my presentation about.